Hello, and welcome to Leading the Way for You, a webinar series hosted by Meadows Retirement Communities and our sister Ecumenical Retirement Community. In this series, our senior care experts will share information and guidance on a variety of topics that interest you. My name is Kelly Kuntz, and I'm coming to you from an apartment at our retirement community. Today, we will be joined by the Reverend Howard West, an ordained minister, trained counselor, and our Executive Director of Spiritual Life. Howard will share information and coping techniques to deal with holiday grief and other emotional challenges during this season. It is my honor to introduce the Reverend Howard West.
Kelly, I'm so glad we're doing this today. As a minister and a counselor, I know that the toughest time of the year for many people is the holidays. I even have a joke among my clergy friends. I say we have our three seasons coming up: Thanksgiving, Christmas, and counseling. And what I hope to do in today's webinar is help people understand why it's so difficult for some folks, and also to understand that that's okay. That, you know, there's a lot of things going on emotionally and socially during the holidays. And especially this year, I can't think of any time during my lifetime or recent history where we're going to have a Thanksgiving this year where many people are not going to be able to get together, and there's going to be a lot of restrictions on the activities that we have. And, you know, one of the things that I find fascinating is, as you know, every year they play the Christmas movies on TV, right? Things like Home Alone or, Uncle Buck and some of those secular movies. But one of the classics that's been on TV and in the movies and in school plays for years is The Christmas Carol with Ebenezer Scrooge. And this is a story, as we all know, about how a man has an identity crisis during the holidays of understanding what he really believes in. And he's visited by these ghosts, the ghosts of Christmas past, the ghosts of Christmas future. And I think one of the reasons why that story has endured for over 150 years is because this is a theme that everyone's wrestling with during the holidays. What is the meaning of the holidays? How am I dealing with it? And also, what memories are coming up and affecting me emotionally during the holidays? One of Dickens' other great novels, of course, was A Tale of Two Cities. And in that book, he has a very famous quote: "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair." And I think that is a wonderful literary reference to the environment that we're living in right now. And I want to give people a sense of hope that even though this is going to be a challenging holiday this year, or any year, if we are prepared to understand what causes it to be difficult, and if we can also learn how we can moderate some of our behaviors, our psychology, our spiritual life, then we'll be able to get through it. And even though it may not be what we hoped, it can be something meaningful. So I have a motto that I came up with a few years ago when I was doing some talks at churches and campuses about the holidays, and it is less is more. Less is more. Now, on a simple level, that's common sense. If we simplify things, they tend to go more smoothly and they're easier. But less here, L-E-S-S, is a mnemonic that stands for: L is for loss and grief, E is for expectations. Those are the two stressors we deal with during the holidays. And the two S's are solutions. The first S is support system or support resources. The second S is spirituality. So I'm going to follow this model in my talk about how less is more, L-E-S-S. And let's take a look at those different components. Well, the first one, of course, is loss. And one of the biggest things that comes up every year as I counsel people or lead religious services is how people find that holiday events are triggers for memories of losses. Now, the most obvious one, of course, is when we get together for a holiday meal or a party or gift giving or whatever the situation, we notice that people aren't there. or we realize that things aren't the same without that person who's passed away. Maybe they were the life of the party, or they helped organize things. So all of these holiday activities that we have, in some sense, are anniversaries of everything that's transpired a year ago or in years past. Now, I was thinking this year how a lot of people are used to going to church on Christmas, and many churches will not be open this year. They'll have to maybe attend it online. And then we have issues around people that we like to see during the holidays, shut-ins, family members, and with travel and health restrictions, that's going to be a big challenge this year. And then, of course, other losses that are not just death are economic losses. And many people right now are struggling with changes in their economic status, and it may be difficult to celebrate the holidays the way that they normally do. And then finally, the other great loss that we see at this time of the year is how we celebrate our beliefs. And a lot of people, I hear this a lot, is, Christmas isn't the same as it used to be, or we used to celebrate this holiday this way in the past. And any type of a major change is a loss. And that can trigger sadness, grief. And I think a lot of us are going to feel a deep sense of loss, maybe more than most holidays, but we can expect that every holiday season, we're going to experience a sense of loss and missing things as things change. So acknowledging those losses is the first step to healing and recovery. One of the problems that a lot of people go through is all this stuff is churning and it's going on inside of them, and they don't talk about it. And because we have this culture, almost a manic culture of the holidays, we have that song, right? It's the most wonderful time of the year. Well, maybe it isn't the most wonderful time of the year for you. And we need to talk about that. And people sometimes feel guilty or ashamed that they aren't feeling excited or happy when it's the most wonderful time of the year. So talking about these losses with friends and family is so important. I miss my grandmother. I miss my friend that passed away. I miss the way we used to be able to get together as a family, but now that my brother's divorced, I can't see his family as frequently as I used to. So really tied in with the losses is change. And every year there's a year's worth of change. And every year there are triggers that remind us of changes in the past. So relationships are really important in what we look at for losses, but also work changes. Many people are working at home, or they've had changes in their work status this year. And as I said, changes with religious and traditional practices has changed. So talking about this is really important. And that's my first letter, the L. We have to acknowledge the losses. We have to know that everybody experiences a sense of loss during the holidays. It's just a matter of how much, because as everything changes every year, things aren't going to be the same. We're going to lose things. So next, the letter E. E stands for two things. It's expectations and emotions. And those two go together, as Forrest Gump would say, like peas and carrots, as our expectations tend to set us up for the way we react to things emotionally. That's one of the main tenets of rational emotive therapy. And so if we want to talk about the biggest challenge of the holidays after losses, it's expectations. Think about it, especially for women that are listening, because I think, unfortunately, our society puts a lot more expectations on women for planning and decorating and doing things during the holidays, although our society is changing. And I'm a big fan of a humorist saying, the key to happiness is low expectations. Because when we have high expectations, we tend to set ourselves up for a disappointment when things don't turn out the way we want them to. And where I see this the worst, believe it or not, is weddings. When I do weddings as a minister, the stress level and the tension in wedding preparation and holding weddings is higher than anything else, because people have all these expectations in their mind of how they think things are supposed to turn out. So what type of expectations do we have? Well, we have expectations of ourselves. How am I going to organize this? How am I going to plan that? How am I going to buy that? We have expectations for family. I expect my kids to behave this way. I expect my uncle to not say something when he shows up for Thanksgiving. I expect the home to look perfect. I expect work to cooperate with me and give me the right days off. I expect to have this service that I go to at my church or synagogue. So these expectations really are kind of a setup. Now, we need expectations. Expectations are a basic part of human psychology. If we couldn't plan and think ahead and expect things, our life would be total chaos. So the key is moderating the expectations. And there's two types of expectations. There's internal expectations, right? What I'm imposing on myself that maybe no one else even knows about. And then there's external expectations, which is what other people impose on me. So I know that for a lot of people that I've talked to that are planning for the holidays, they're putting all this pressure on themselves because internally they have this idea of how everything's supposed to go. Meanwhile, I can go talk to the family and say, are you expecting this, that, or the other thing? And they'll say, no, I don't care if we do that. That's fine. But that person who's putting all that pressure on themselves inside is really making it more difficult during the holidays. Now, as far as external expectations go, and we'll talk about relationships in a minute, external expectations are things that we have to really work on. We have to validate with people and ask them, what do you expect? Or if the people are good communicators, try to get them to talk about what they're hoping to have during the holidays so that they don't end up expecting us to do things that we don't even know about. So expectations are important. And then emotions, as I said, this is probably the most emotional time of the year. We have higher rates of depression and sadness. We have more people struggling with anxiety and fear of economic insecurity, anxiety about how events are going to turn out. And I would say this year, as we've been looking to the news with the pandemic, all of these emotional challenges are elevated this year when you throw the pandemic on top of the normal holiday. We have other emotions like jealousy, and that comes from competing in families for attention or trying to look a certain way in public settings. And in addition to depression, we just have loneliness. This could be a very lonely time of the year for many people, not just shut-ins, but for people who are in family systems that feel where they feel that they're not understood by the family members, maybe because they have a different lifestyle or they've made different choices about their relationships or their education. And even though they're with people physically, they feel lonely because they aren't seen for who they really are and respected for who they are. And then, of course, we can throw mental health issues into there too, with serious mental illness that can occur and addiction. So I also have to make a footnote here about physical conditions because many people during the holidays struggle with things like high blood pressure, chronic pain, fatigue. For those that have survived a episode of COVID-19, we're seeing in the news that people can have some chronic fatigue syndromes that are lingering. And then the other big issue, of course, that is emotional and physical is if you're caring for someone in your home, an elderly parent, a special needs child, that really makes things a lot more difficult. I mean, it's already more challenging even before the holidays, but when you throw all of the change in schedule and the expectations in there, that can make things more difficult. So in covering, the first two letters, losses, and then the E for expectations and emotions. This may be at a point in the talk where people are feeling a little depressed and overwhelmed. But here's the good news. The silver lining is if you can identify this and understand that it's going on, it's going to help you feel less guilty and step back and say, wow, no wonder this is so hard. There's all this stuff going on. And I think it's important to know that the more you talk about a problem, or understand it, the less power that has over you. So now that we're at this time of the year where we hear that song on TV, it's the best time of the year, and we feel like, no, it's the worst time of the year, we need to balance that and realize, no, This is just a time of the year where things tend to be more complicated. And it may not be the best time of the year, but it doesn't have to be the worst time of the year. I can grow through this and I can understand what's going on. And this leads us into the second two letters about I can get support. I can look at my spirituality. And let's go back to Ebenezer Scrooge, right? Wasn't that a happy ending at the end of that story? Because what happened is when he was challenged and he went through that emotional and spiritual identity crisis of understanding Christmas, he changed and he became a better person. And I would say that's one of the lost gems of the holiday that we have lost in our culture and maybe in religion, is that we find light in darkness. So let's go on to the next one. S stands for support. That could be support systems or support resources. And in my other webinar I did on care for the caregiver through a spiritual lens, I really strongly emphasized how important support groups or support relationships are. Because one of the things that we know is that many of these processes of working through issues, we can't do them alone. And that's why I concluded that talk saying, using an old phrase from support groups, we can do things together that we can't do alone. And this is all about relationships. And relationships are a paradox. Oftentimes, relationships are our biggest problem, but relationships can be our biggest solution. So I wanted to take a look at relationships in our lives, and I want to break them down into two categories. The first are relationships that deplete us, relationships that eat up our energy. You ever have someone you know like that at work or maybe the family, and they come to a meeting and you say, I could tell he or she is here because I felt the air get sucked out of the room, right? Well, that is often a description of people who are very narcissistic and attention seeking. But relationships tend to either take up our energy or restore or renew our energy. So before we get into supportive relationships, we have to take a step back, especially during the holidays, and take a look at what are some unhealthy relationships that are depleting me during the holidays. Who are the people that have high expectations, so high that no matter what I do, I can't satisfy them? See, that would be a depleting relationship. It takes a lot of energy to have someone constantly criticize you and not value what you're doing. And the other type of expectation that we see too is that we expect people to be a certain way and they can't. And when we're in a relationship with family or friends where we're expecting them to listen to us and they're not good listeners, that becomes a depleting relationship because we're going there to get something that we can't get. And we end up depleting ourselves because we're setting ourselves up to not get the support and the attention that we need. Another depleting type of relationship is the family person who likes to use you as a dumpster. They want to call during the holidays and complain about everything that they're upset about and use you as their emotional dumpster. That's another dynamic we see. And it's important with these depleting relationships to set boundaries. If we don't set boundaries with people that deplete us and take our energy up, they just keep sucking the energy out of us. And not only does that deplete our energy and make the holidays more difficult and depressing, that eats our time up. So we can't have relationships with the people who we could use to give us energy and support us. So that's why I wanted to take a step back first and say, take a look at the people in your life that are taking up a lot of your energy and making things difficult, and think about putting some limits on that and setting boundaries. And then you can turn and shift to the people who can be supportive. Now, who could that be? It doesn't have to be a therapist or a minister. It could be anyone who has a few qualities. The first one is a good listener. Part of dealing with all of the difficulties during the holidays is we're trying to process everything that's going on, the pressure, the expectations, the changes, the losses. And although we can sit down and we can journal and write about that privately, when we externalize what's going on inside it and talk to other people, that type of processing tends to be more therapeutic for two reasons. One is when we verbalize it and someone listens to us, that validates the struggle that we're going through as they listen to us. But the other reason, and this is the second point about a good support, is if we talk to people that have experience with the same problems, that validates that the problem is real and that we can deal with it because there's someone else sitting and listening to us who's dealt with the challenge. So, for example, we have all the classic stories of the mother-in-law from hell that comes over for Thanksgiving dinner, or the crazy uncle that sits in the corner. Well, it's okay to talk about that, but it's not the same as you find out that your friend at work has crazy Uncle Joe that comes over at Thanksgiving and freaks the kids out. And when you talk to your friend at work, you can not only realize that that happens in other families, you might even be able to have a little laugh and lighten up your attitude about it and realize you can roll with it, and that's just part of getting through the holidays. So another important thing for supportive friends is that you need friends that can have fun with you. We can get burnt out during the holidays with all of the plans and the expectations. And I know some people, actually, here's an example from my own family. I was getting tired of all the pressure with Christmas and being clergy. And one year, I just said to my kids, let's go trout fishing. We just went trout fishing out of the blue. And there was no Christmas bells. There was no Christmas anything. It was just a break from the whole holiday grind. And it's good to have friends that you can just take a break with and have some fun. And that could be an outdoor hike or a walk or cooking. And of course, it depends on the social distancing and what we're dealing with now. So those are some of the qualities of people that are supportive relationships to help us. What about more formally, aside from friends and family? You can talk to people in the community that that have experience with dealing with challenges, maybe someone at work, clergy, or people in the church community, someone that you know from church that maybe isn't clergy, but they're older and wiser, or they understand what's going on. Maybe extended family members that live in another city. We're getting used to distance communication now. Maybe you have older relatives or family members in another town or city that are good listeners, and you can talk to them on the phone. And unfortunately, a lot of this will probably have to be on the phone this year. And then, of course, there are support groups. I usually bring that up, but with the COVID pandemic, in-person groups like that are pretty much hard to find right now. However, I can tell you, because I've looked into this, there are hundreds of online support groups that you can do through Zoom meetings like this. And I know many, many people that have been using those, and they are very satisfied with that opportunity. So finally, the last letter, S, spirituality. I talked about spirituality in my other webinar versus spirituality versus religion. Well, religion tends to be, of course, a belief system where there are stated doctrines and stated traditions that help to establish a pattern that is controlled by the church organization, so that there is a religious or theological consistency. That's important. I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister. You might call that, spiritual quality control. And religion is good, but religion has its limitations. And we're seeing right now in our culture today that a lot of people tend to be less religious than they were 50 years ago. We talk about the Christmas and Easter people that only show up to church at Christmas and Easter. Even those numbers are dropping. Of course, with the pandemic, there won't be many services. So religion, when we talk about the holidays, I prefer to use the term holidays instead of just Christmas, because the holidays is different for different people. It may be Hanukkah, it may be Christmas. Maybe people aren't religious, but they still celebrate Thanksgiving and the way we gather as families, and maybe, greater themes like light and darkness and we look at religion that way. Now, spirituality, on the other hand, has so many dimensions. It's about connecting with a higher power, or, where God would be the word we use in most religious discussions. People may call it a higher power or a higher being or the creator of the universe. And spirituality doesn't define that specifically. So with spirituality, it's about relationships. It's about a relationship in connection with this higher authority or higher power. And it's also about relationships with people in our lives. And here's the key word. It's about meaning. It's about meaning. I'm a really big fan of Viktor Frankl, who was a 20th century Austrian psychiatrist who was a concentration camp inmate and studied the impact of suffering on the human condition and the importance of finding meaning. And what Viktor Frankl learned, as this is the ultimate example of how do you live life and have a quality of life when it's a difficult time, what he discovered is that the secret to life is finding meaning. And we need to do this, especially during the holidays, because what can happen is, going back to expectations. We have so many expectations about what the holiday is supposed to be that maybe we don't even understand what it's supposed to mean to me or what it's supposed to mean to my children. And the wonderful part about this is when we get to decide our own meaning of what the holidays is, that frees us from some of the expectations. It frees us from the guilt that we're not doing it the right way. And it gives us the freedom to say, as I said earlier, maybe it's not the most wonderful time of the year, but I'm going to make it mean something for me because I'm going to decide how I want to do it. Maybe we won't put up a Christmas tree this year. Maybe we're just going to decorate the house with lights because I want to focus on, this is a time of the year where we embrace light when it gets dark out earlier and there's so much depression and struggling. And we're going to focus on this as a light theme this year. Or maybe with foods, instead of having to make the same old recipes, we're going to say, you know what, everybody pick a recipe that really means something to you. And we're going to have a meal and share why that food means so much to me. So finding meaning, even though that doesn't sound like a very spiritual topic, I would say is the key theme of having a spiritual focus during the holiday. Instead of focusing on religious traditions or decorations or particular symbols that are determined by our culture, step back, take what you like and leave the rest. Keep the stuff that works for you. Be willing to let go of other things that don't work for you. And instead of feeling like you're on this holiday treadmill trying to fulfill expectations of what the holidays are supposed to be, you can say, this is my holiday. This is my family's holiday, and we're doing it our way this year. That's maybe the silver lining of this pandemic. I said that to my wife this morning. I said, people usually are stressed out of this time of the year because they have to do all these things to get ready for Christmas and Thanksgiving. But with the pandemic now, a lot of that stuff we can't do. So it gives us a little more freedom to just get creative and do other things that maybe we haven't tried before. So that's about spirituality. Even though I'm a minister, I hope some people aren't disappointed that this isn't a more religious take. But I think given the times and the culture that we're in right now, that's how a lot of people are looking at the holidays and spirituality. I'll still be doing Christmas services as a minister this year, but this is more about a day-to-day life issue thing. So the next thing I wanted to talk about before I wrap it up is special considerations for folks with dementia. And I just have a few tips here that I wanted to give everybody before I conclude. Some of these tips were written before the pandemic, so I'm going to have to modify it a little bit. One of the things that comes up every year with the holidays for people with dementia is their schedules change and people are thrown into a social situation that is not part of their usual routine. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of people talk, and that can be stressful. So the first pointer for folks out there that are dealing with loved ones with memory impairment and dementia is you need to look at what the plan is and be prepared to make adaptations. If it's a family event where there's going to be a number of people, doesn't have to be a big group of people, but maybe a number of people that the person doesn't know, maybe distant relatives or friends of the kids or something like that, that type of stimulation and encounter with the unfamiliar can be a stressor for people with dementia. A lot of loud noise, bright lights, any type of visual or auditory stimulation. You may want to talk to the party event host, or as you're planning it yourself, modify the environment so that it's not quite as noisy or visually overstimulating. And if you're going to do something new or have a different routine in the home where you're caring for someone, it's a good idea to start ahead of time and begin to prepare them by maybe making some changes or starting to rehearse, okay, we're going to be doing this, and just go through the routine so that when you do have the holiday event, that it's just not cold turkey to deal with the strange new situation. And then the other part is, this is a time for you to educate your family members about what is memory impairment, what is dementia, what is Alzheimer's. Because, most of the people out there don't have a lot of education unless they're living with someone or have a grandparent that they're in contact with, so that allows them to know what's going on. And it's amazing, as I said earlier, the more you know about a problem, the less power that problem has over you. And likewise, the more you educate people in your family or friends that will be involved in a holiday activity where we have someone coming with dementia or memory impairment or Alzheimer's, then they'll be able to interpret some of the behaviors in a much less judgmental way. And then the next thing, of course, is that flexibility is the key. As I said at the beginning of the talk, expectations are very powerful things. And we have to be prepared during the holidays that when we're dealing with loved ones with dementia and memory impairment, that we can have the greatest plans in the world, but we don't know what things are going to be that day when things play out, especially with people with Alzheimer's. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people that they've had wonderful plans for the holiday or a birthday, and then their parent or grandparent is having a bad day and they just can't do it. So it's very important to keep expectations open and be very flexible. So I'll close with another analogy. Or one of my counselor friends said that life is not like just rowing across a placid lake. Life is taking a kayak down a river, and sometimes the currents can flip the boat over. But when you're in a kayak, you can roll with it. And that's sort of my closing bit of advice here today, is remember, as we are going down the river of Hanukkah and Christmas and the holidays, and the currents throw something at you that flips your boat, roll with it, be flexible. And remember, it may not be the most wonderful time of the year. It doesn't have to be the worst time of the year, but it can be a meaningful time of the year, no matter what happens.
Thanks, Howard. I have so many questions. And the first one is a very difficult one to ask. This year, with the pandemic, so many of us are facing the probability that we will be unable to spend the holidays with our older loved ones. And maybe in the back of our minds, we're wondering, could this be the last holiday that we will have our older loved one with us? As a trained counselor, could you give us some coping techniques or advice on how to deal with this? Maybe how to make the holidays very special, because this truly is a form of grief.
Yes. That would be considered anticipatory grief, because you're starting to grieve a loss before it happens. And I just talked to actually one of my chaplains this morning, and she said, I think this is going to be the last Christmas we're going to have with my mother. There's two sides to that. One side is it's important to acknowledge, like you had said, that there's going to be some grieving that's starting on right now in the present, even though the person is still with us, because we're anticipating it won't go on forever. It's good to talk about that. But we can flip that over into a positive by realizing that time is precious and maybe make more of an extra effort to enjoy the time with that person while we have them. Now, the tricky part is, especially if you've got loved ones that are in long-term care facilities, many of them don't allow personal visits or there are restrictions on that. So I think we all need a little help with using technology, phone calls, FaceTime, Skype. But I think I've never heard anyone regret spending too much time with someone they've lost, but I've heard many people regret that they didn't spend enough time when they were here. So use this as your opportunity and treasure the moment. And you can feel the grief and be sad, but still enjoy yourself. It's walking and chewing gum at the same time is just part of how this works. And talk to people about it, especially people that are in the same boat.
Many of us travel to see our loved ones over the holidays, especially the winter holidays. And this year that may not be possible. And we're going to need to look at new ways to connect if possible. Like you and I are talking right now via Zoom. And I know that a lot of families will be looking at using different tools for video chats and conference calls. And that's a great way to connect with family. Can you provide any guidance or tips on how we can make the most out of using these tools to have virtual visits and how we can make those enjoyable so that we can truly capture our spirit of family and enjoy each other in this way?
You've hit the nail on the head. Technology is important, and I'm going to issue a call to arms to young people here. You know, if they're not listening to this, if you are listening, go round up all the young people in your family, because there is a generational divide or challenge here with a lot of older family members don't have the technological skills to do Zoom or FaceTime. And I think this could be a really exciting time for young people to connect with older family members, grandparents, and help them set up the technology so that they can connect. And you can do it. I was filling in at a church this fall, and we had to do the continuing education, the church education online. And the woman who's the committee chair is 84 years old. And it was a little choppy at first, but the younger people helped her. She learned the technology. And once she got used to it, she really enjoyed it. And now she uses that technology all the time. We have to learn. This is just the reality that we live in now. And I think this is where younger people can help older people. And I say younger, not necessarily kids, but adult children or middle-aged people. That's maybe part of our Christian and spiritual mission this year, is to help restore some communication with people with the use of technology.
We're recording this webinar in 2020, and it's been a very difficult year with COVID-19 and a very divisive presidential election. And what a lot of us are trying to do this holiday season is just reconnect and appreciate what we have in our lives, primarily beloved family members and friends, and the gift of basic necessities that we can appreciate. What advice can you give to just have us put all that noise behind us, politics, illness, just for this season so that we can connect with families and truly enjoy our time together?
This is another one of those one step backward, two step forward deals. I think one of the, in my talk, I talked about you need to identify depleting relationships that take your energy, and then set boundaries, cut some of those people out of your life or limit it, and then go to the people that energize you. We need to do that internally or psychologically. And I would say that the two, instead of depleting and supporting, in this case, it would be divisive and unifying. These are two polarities, okay? And I've been doing a lot of reading lately on how social media and the news media and politics have really ramped up divisive psychology in our society. And it's so bad that one of the things that they talked about is that we're talking about tribalism now, is that tribes are linked together by having a common hatred for something sometimes, and families are linked together because of common love for each other. So the first step backward is we have to identify what are some of the divisive topics that we could be talking about during the holidays: politics, religion, maybe medical issues in the pandemic, and set some boundaries with people that we're going to stay away from that to keep some peace when we're together. That's the step backward. Then the two steps forward is spending more time thinking about who needs love and support during this time. And that's why I'm glad you brought up that thing about, hey, maybe this is the last Christmas we're going to have with my grandma. Because if we realize that we only have so much time left on this earth and we can't go back and redo it, that could be a very good motivator to be kind to people and to love them. The other thing too, and I usually tell a story about myself to make it personal. When I was a kid, I've shared before, I lost my mother as a teenager, and she died in October. And the first Christmas after she died, we planned to go to Florida. And because my mother did everything, there were no decorations, there's no Christmas tree, no gifts. And it was right before Christmas, and I came from school, and I was really depressed. And I went into the dining room, and there on the dining room table was this tiny little, like 3-foot high Christmas tree that my grandmother had decorated, and she put it on the dining room table. And I literally had tears in my eyes, and I felt like there's still Christmas in this house. She remembered. And I always say that was the biggest and best Christmas tree in my entire life. And this ties in with your question, is if you look around, you're going to see there's a lot of people in your life that they need love. They need to be remembered. And if you think of that gift, the gift of giving them love and attention and saying, I remember you, I care about you, that's the real spirit of what the holidays is. And I think if we focus on caring for other people and not what we are divided about, that's not only going to make the holidays better, it's going to help us heal from this really divisive, toxic political and news environment we've been living through in the last so many months.
For some people watching this webinar, it could be the first holiday without someone they love. Maybe this year they've lost a grandparent, a parent, a child, or a friend. What advice can you give to help folks cope through their first holiday season without that beloved person at the table?
I think the first thing, and this is more of a caution, is do not isolate. Okay, it's very dangerous after a loss, a death, especially during the holidays, to want to just go into a hole and to isolate. And isolation is very dangerous. When we isolate, it can really amplify depression, and a lot of the problems that we are thinking about get amplified in our heads. So I would say that the first thing, even if you don't feel like doing it, is reach out, talk to people, spend time with people. If you can't physically spend time with them, talk to them on the phone. I know that I had dealt with someone who had a horrible, tragic loss earlier this year, and I said to him, can you call me every day just so I know you're okay? So one tip might be make a commitment to talking to someone every day that cares about you, that wants to see how you're doing. The other thing too is remember, when we have deaths and a loss, this doesn't heal overnight. It's okay to accept that maybe life isn't going to be as sweet, and you may have trouble with sadness and depression, but it will pass eventually. It may take time. So be easy on yourself and realize that it takes time and that you have to go through those emotions. I know it's not fun, it's not pleasant, it's difficult. But if you know that by feeling the emotions and going through them, that that's part of the healing process, then you're making progress, even though you may not feel better. And you want to be careful about drinking and abusing substances. On the other hand, if you're really struggling with depression, please talk to your doctor. Clinical depression is not only serious, but it's potentially dangerous. And it's very treatable with some pharmacological help from a qualified doctor. And of course, spiritually, if you are having some problems understanding why it happened or how it happened or what's the meaning or where do they go, find a minister or rabbi or someone of faith that has a strong spiritual life and religious background, and process those deeper issues about, what happened to them, where are they going. Some of those things can't be answered by psychology or medicine, and you need a religious or spiritual person to talk to. So those would be my tips.
Thank you, Howard. As we end this webinar, is there anything you would like to add?
We're all just doing the best we can this year with this holiday. And let's remember the unifying spiritual themes of most religions at this time of the year, certainly Judaism and Christianity. It's the main theme is how light overcomes darkness, right? That's the one great unifying theme. So let's remember, the darker things get, the more we need to turn to the light and even be the light to other people in our lives that are suffering in darkness.
Thank you, Howard. You provided some advice that is so valuable to so many of us at this time of year. Do you have questions that were not answered in this webinar? Well, this does not have to be the end of your caregiving journey. Please reach out to us via email at asktheexperts@countrymeadows.com or asktheexperts@ecumenicalretirement.org. Thank you to our viewers for joining us. Remember, we're here to help. We're here to help you. Have a great day.